Hi, this is Erica Merrill, and I'm the founder of Perfect Legal Video. And I am very excited to bring to you today Attorney Nicole Reeves Lavallee. She has a family and a real estate law firm out in the Worcester, Massachusetts area, and she comes to us quite often, once a week, with fantastic information in both of those areas. Today, we're going to be talking about something cutting edge and something that is happening now in family law, and that is child support guidelines that are changing in 2021. So I want to welcome you to the show today, Nicole. Thank you so much for taking the time out.
Thank you. And I think it's very important that people understand what these new guidelines are going to be about.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I know that anyone who has children and they are divorced or they have split up from their partner and they have children, this could affect them. So I'm really glad that we're going over some of this today. So let's talk about the child support guidelines. When do you typically get child support? When are you eligible?
You're eligible, obviously, upon birth of the child. That's the easiest part. The question is, when are you actually going to get it? Well, if you're cohabitating with somebody and you're splitting the expenses and you're divvying up the time, then obviously that might not apply. Obviously, if you're married, it's not going to apply if you're living together. It's when you separate. So you separated from that person, or you've never lived with that person, or you were never married to that person. That's when it's going to come into play. Now, it doesn't happen automatic. You have to do something. You have to file something with the court, whether that be a complaint for paternity, a complaint to establish child support custody, or a complaint for divorce. There has to be some underlying complaint to ask the court for that support of your child.
Okay, well, so what's the process of getting child support?
Well, after you file whatever that complaint is, you're going to have a summons that's going to be served on the parent. And then once we have that served, you can go into court and ask the court for either a temporary order or a judgment asking for the child support based off of your respective incomes.
And here's a really tricky question, because I know it could be an it depends situation for some people, but how is child support calculated? As I understand, there's a calculation, but this might be where some of the changes are.
It is under a guideline, so we have a child support worksheet that basically sets forth who's going to get what and how we're going to acquire that. Simple answers, we're going to look at both of your incomes. So we're going to look at your gross incomes from all sources. We're going to put that on the formula. We're also going to look at the age of the children, as well as the cost of health insurance, daycare, other child support obligations, dental, vision, stuff of that nature. So we're going to put all of those numbers into the worksheet. And then based off of your numbers, we're going to come up with a number that is set forth in the guidelines. And that's the number that the court's going to look at.
I mean, that makes sense, because if you're making the same amount of money and you have the children 50-50, then you really don't need it. But if there's any differences in incomes, you want to make sure that the child is going to have roughly the same lifestyle in both households. I mean, is that the reason why, or is there more?
That's the basic reason for it. I mean, the reality is we can run guidelines, and one of the questions is the children with you 1/3 of the time, 2/3 of the time, equal time? So there are formulas that we can put in for that to determine whether or not that number should be higher or lower, depending on the circumstances. So again, we're looking to support that child, making sure that that child isn't living in one house where it's rags to riches. We have more of an equal blend at both houses.
So I remember when my parents were divorced, my mom ended up taking my dad back to court a few times over the course of our growing up to get a change in the child support, because his circumstances changed quite substantially. So, I mean, do these child support guidelines ever change themselves? I know that everyone's circumstances may change and you can get amendments for that, but I mean, I'm just curious.
Absolutely. It's one of those things that every 3 years there's a special task force that is assigned, and they go in and they evaluate everything. They look at what worked on the current guidelines, what didn't work, how is this affecting the people that are below poverty level, how is this affecting the people that have substantial income, how can we better help these families to come up with a number that makes more sense. So every 3 years, they have to evaluate, they have to tweak it, they have to make changes. And sometimes the changes are very nominal, sometimes they're significant. It all depends on where we are. In the last guidelines in 2017, they realized very quickly, oops. And they said, maybe we need to tweak something. So in 2017, it was the only time that they made another amendment in 2018, because there was a minor tweak that they needed to make. And they caught it right away because they didn't want to wait another 3 years until that review time, because they knew that would be an injustice to the parties.
So the big question now, what about people that are getting child support at this moment? Does it just automatically change, or will it change at all?
It won't change unless you're in a temporary order. So if you're in a temporary order between now and the next court date, chances are that change is going to happen, in which case the new guidelines are going to be in effect. That comes into effect on October 1st of 2021. If you are at a judgment, then no, the court doesn't automatically review your child support. You would have to file a modification saying, I'm looking for that change. So it's not an automatic if you already have a judgment. If you don't have a judgment and something's pending, yes, the court will look at it at your next court hearing.
So when do these changes happen?
They come into effect on October 4th of this year. We are now seeing the guidelines. We've seen them for the last month now. So we as attorneys are preparing, we're running some numbers, we're giving our clients the information so that, again, once they come into play on October 4th, we can be prepared to see, oh my God, it's going to increase or it's going to decrease.
So who do you see this helping, and like what are the differences between what we have now and what we're going to have in another month or so?
There are a lot of differences. I think the biggest difference is, again, going to address that poverty level. The minimum guidelines under the 2017-2018 orders was $100 a month, which equates to $25 a week. Currently, under the new guidelines in October, it is now going to be lowered to $50 a month, which is a huge amount of a reduction for somebody that has nominal income. So I think that's one of the biggest things that we're going to be looking at. Another huge thing is on the opposite end of that, where we have, hey, the defined income before was up to $250,000. So the court would take a number, look at the combined income. If it was under $250,000, it would be a combined income, and they run the guidelines, and that's the number. Now they've increased that to $400,000 for two families. So again, that combined income is now raised from $250,000 to $400,000. Those are substantial increases, both on the low end and the high end. And then you have kind of other things that are going into play. Some of the things are that if the dental or vision insurance aren't specifically for the children, you're not going to get that credit anymore. Where again, we would get it if it was automatic. Health insurance, again, there's some tweaks to that, but those are kind of the same. One of the big items is going to be, again, we're looking at the children that are in the bracket over 18 up through 23 when you're still might be getting child support. In that bracket, that's going to go to, hey, again, it's discretionary, but we might take into effect the cost of college tuition. Cost of college tuition originally was 1/3 of UMass Amherst tuition rates. Now that's increased to up to 50%. So they changed that from a 33% to a 50%. So those are just some of the increases, some of the changes that have been going on and will be in effect in a month or so.
Just to look at some of what you were talking about, what would the judge do before if a combined family went over 250,000? Or even now, what if their combined family is over 400,000?
There's still a formula for that, but that's a discretionary number. That's a number that the judge can say, hey, there is a range. It's kind of like we see on the alimony worksheets. It's a range from $200 extra to $400 extra. Judge, pick one. So they still have that bracket after the 400 now versus the 250 currently. But again, it's discretionary. It's literally the judge may consider that extra income, may not even attribute it to as child support, totally at the judge's discretion. Before that, up to that cap of 250 or now 400,000, it's not as discretionary.
Well, that's very interesting. It was also something I caught there was that they may have child support over 18. Now, I know they do that in New York, for example. It's up to the age of 21, I think. That's not something we've done in Massachusetts before. Is that something that they're easing into now?
Well, as last I checked, New York was 25. But I would say that Massachusetts has always done a number over the age of 18. We have been very consistent on that for over at least 20 years now. We've done it. So between the age of 18 to 21, it is if a child is principally dependent on a parent and living with a parent. From 21 to 23, it is if they are enrolled in college full time. Now that's, again, the general numbers. That's the basic for it. Obviously, there's exceptions to that, so don't rely on that alone, as I'm going to get until 23. But general numbers in terms of what the children are doing and where they're going to college and how they're living, most of them fall within that 21 to 23 range, depending on what's happening with the children.
So when you were talking about paying for college, is that when you get to the college age, if one of the parents decides that they are going to pay for college, and then things change with the child support, or is it that it's just kind of expected that they're going to be paying a third or a half of what UMass Boston charges?
It's not UMass Boston, it's UMass Amherst. It's very specific that it has to be UMass Amherst rates, because we have multiple colleges and it has to be that rate. That's what the special task force had indicated. In terms of how much that money it may be that, you know what, if you're paying 50% of the UMass Amherst rates, that you're not responsible for any child support. But by the same token, the court is going to look at that in discretionary and say, well, they're going to a school that is Quinsigamond versus UMass Amherst, so obviously the tuition is a lot lower. Let's give them extra money. Let's give them some portion of child support. It may not be the full child support number. It may be. So again, the court is going to have that discretion to look at and go, what is your contribution to both parents in terms of paying for college? What is your contribution to this child's living expenses? And then run the child support guidelines based off of all of those things.
Wow. So that's interesting. I'm not sure that everybody that has younger children that's going through divorce understands all that fully. So thank you for that explanation. So do courts have to follow the guidelines, or is it just kind of a suggestion?
I'm going to start with the premise that yes, they have to follow it. Can they deviate? Yes. So they're going to start with, this is the number. Counsel, tell me why it should be that number. And you're going to have to be able to articulate certain reasons. This child has extraordinary health issues. I have extraordinary health issues. I need to travel to see my child, and it's going to cost me $500 every single time, and I only get to do that, 3 times a year. Mom doesn't see the child at all throughout the year, and I'm sole provider of these children. So a lot of those things are going to come into play. So can you deviate? Yes. But again, that court is going to start with, yes, this is the number. Why shouldn't it be this number? And then you have to be able to give a good reason that the judge will say, I grant a deviation higher or lower than the guidelines.
Wow. Okay. So, I mean, that makes sense. They've always seemed to have an option to change things to see for different situations. Because I know sometimes wild things come up, and they want to do what they think is right, but they still kind of follow the guidelines. So you mentioned a bit about child support for children that are staying at home, and I just want to clarify, when does child support stop? And after the age of 18, what happens with child support?
So again, it depends on what the circumstances are, but after the age of 18, and assuming that they've graduated from high school, because that's one of the requirements, then we're going to look at what are they doing? Are they living at home? If they're living at home, so they're living with mom, mom's a custodial parent, she's supporting the child's working a part-time job, and she's paying all the bills, and there's no rent being paid by this child because he can't afford it, then chances are that's going to be up to the age of 21. If the child, on the other hand, is going to school full time and continues to go to school all the way through his 23rd birthday, then again, that's when child support's going to end. So a lot of different factors come into play, but certainly I would say plan on 23. More importantly, call me. I will tell you exactly what it is. It may be something that is listed in your separation agreement. It may be something listed in the judgment, because those things can certainly be put into place that are different to the guidelines. So again, what does your judgment say? And are you reading it properly? And if it's silent, then we have to look at the statute, which again, you should consult with me because there are exceptions to the rules. So there's a lot of things that you need to know about. And I don't know if you fall into one of those categories, and you may not know how to interpret those categories.
I mean, this has been so interesting, as usual. Can you just answer one more question, just for the folks out there? Because I always encourage people to call if they have any questions. But is there anything that someone can look at in their lives, in their divorce agreement, whatever it is, to just kind of give them a hint that they should give you a call and see if, something should change in their child support?
Well, I think the biggest thing is right now, everybody should be calling me. The guidelines are changing. It doesn't take that long for me to run the numbers and say, hey, this is what the new number is. Maybe it's the number right now that you're receiving is $150 a week. We run the guidelines and we say it's $160. Not worth it. Okay, great. But by the same token, what if you're the payor? And that extra $10 a week might be worth it for you to go into court and get it reduced. So again, you have to look at those numbers. I think realistically, everybody should be picking up the phone, calling their attorneys, having those numbers run, because I think that's crucial. We need to know how these guidelines affect you and whether or not it's worth it for us to go into court, or if it's something we should just wait. Or by the same token, again, even if you decide to wait, that doesn't mean your ex is going to wait. So you wait for them to file on you, and now all of a sudden you're going, oh my God, I have to answer a complaint for modification. Oh my God. At least if you've already met with me, we know what to expect. We know what those numbers are going to be. So again, if that number is decreasing, you want to be able to at least plan for it, that if and when my ex does this, this is how it's going to impact me. So I think knowledge is power. So I would certainly say reach out, talk to us. And then what we also do is we'll evaluate all of the terms in the agreement, because it might not just be the child support that needs to be tweaked. It might be other things that we need to tweak in the agreement. So it doesn't hurt you to do a cursory review of the entire document.
I mean, and that might be something that you should do every few years anyway. Obviously, they're looking at the guidelines every few years for the same reason. So many things change in the economy and in the state of affairs, that they really need to look at that. So, I mean, I'm glad that they're helping out the people that are at the poverty level with this. And, I'm glad that they're just trying to keep making things fair for everyone. It sounds like they're doing a good job with that, and it sounds like a lot more work for you. So I would encourage everyone to give Nicole a call if you have any questions about the child support guidelines, and if you need to get that modified or anything in your divorce agreement or separation agreement that has to do with the children. All right. Thank you so much for joining us today, Nicole.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you everyone for listening in. As usual, this has been very educational, and I hope you all take advantage of this cutting edge information. We will see you again next week.